"Hey, you can't be here. This is Hoa property," she screamed, arms flailing, as I stood in front of my own storage unit, keys in hand, utterly confused as to why a stranger was accusing me of trespassing on land I own outright. For a full second, I thought I was being pranked, but there was no camera crew. Just a furious middle-aged woman in a pastel cardigan blocking my access with a clipboard, and the confidence of someone who'd mistaken delusion for legal authority. I had driven out that morning to drop off a couple of pressure washers and a trailer full of lumber into my storage unit, a red metal building I'd owned for nearly a decade on a small plot just outside city limits. It sat off a gravel road, nestled between a feed store and a tire shop, nowhere near any subdivision. So when I pulled up and saw the lot full of sedans, minivans, and SUVs, I thought I had taken a wrong turn. Some of the vehicles were parked so crookedly it looked like a tailgate party. Worse yet, someone had backed a Chrysler Pacifica directly in front of my unit's roll-up door, completely blocking me in. That was the first sign something was off. I parked on the shoulder, hopped out, and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Lawn chairs were folded in the back of a few trunks, coolers sat propped beside tires, and a half-deflated beach ball rolled in the breeze. That's when she stormed up to me like a hall monitor with a vendetta and told me I was violating Hoa policy by being there. I didn't even respond for a second. My brain had to do a full reboot. This wasn't an HOA area. My place wasn't part of any neighborhood, let alone governed by a homeowners association. The closest house was half a mile down the road, separated by a tree line and to rusting cattle gates. I looked behind her, then at the storage unit, then at her again. "Ma'am, I own this unit," I said carefully, holding up my key as if that would clear everything up. It didn't. She flipped open her clipboard and pointed to a sheet filled with names. "We've got a shared parking agreement with the Hoa during clubhouse renovations. This unit was designated for overflow community storage and temporary parking." She smiled like a dentist delivering bad news gently. "I'm just here to enforce access." "Access?" I blinked. "To my building?" "Yes, per the newsletter. It's all written here." I walked past her to the door, hoping a closer look would prove this was some kind of mistake. But no. Taped next to the padlock was a laminated sign reading, "Community Storage Access. Hoa permitted users only. Temporary shared unit." In smaller print at the bottom, it read, "As per Hoa approval." It hit me like a snow shovel to the face. Someone, likely whoever ran the Hoa, had falsely claimed my property as part of their community asset. Maybe they assumed no one would notice, or maybe they figured I was just some absentee owner. Either way, they'd taken my privately owned land and were letting their residents treat it like a public lot. And worst of all, they had printed this nonsense and posted it like it had any legal merit. "Where did you get the key?" I asked sharply. She faltered slightly, then said, "It was issued by the Hoa president." "We had it rekeyed." "You did what?" "That's standard practice for shared units." "This isn't shared," I shouted, my voice rising despite myself. "This is my land. That unit is mine. None of this is legal. You people broke in and changed the lock." Her smile vanished. "I don't appreciate your tone. If you have a complaint, take it up with the board." I took out my phone and started taking pictures, every license plate, the bogus sign, the people lounging around. Some of them were now looking over curiously, realizing things weren't as simple as Geraldine in command had made it seem. A few of them quietly got into their cars and started backing out of the lot, but others just stood there watching, probably used to Hoa drama and not fully grasping the situation. Then came the kicker. As I snapped a photo of the Chrysler blocking my door, she stepped into the frame. Hand outstretched. "I'm going to need you to delete those. This is private property." I laughed, actually laughed. "You're standing on my property and telling me to delete photos of you trespassing?" She took a step back, realizing she'd lost control of the situation. "If you don't leave, I'll have to call Hoa enforcement." "Please do," I said, "and while you're at it, call the police." "In fact, I'll do it myself." Her mouth opened to protest, but I was already dialing. The sheriff showed up 20 minutes later, during which she made 3 calls. one of which seemed to be to someone from the Hoa board because I overheard her say, "He's being very difficult and aggressive." The sheriff was a guy I knew, Deputy Harrison, someone I'd seen at the county fair and once at a tire blowout on Route 9. He listened to both of us, checked my paperwork and ownership docs I kept in my truck's glove compartment, and then turned to her with a flat expression. "Ma'am," he said, "this land and that unit belong to Mr. Daniels here. The Hoa has no jurisdiction here whatsoever. But we had it in the newsletter. Newsletter doesn't override the deed. You're trespassing, and whoever changed the locks without his consent may be facing criminal charges." The look on her face equaled parts disbelief, betrayal, and pure Geraldine fury was something I'd bottle and sell as motivation if I could. By the time she left, half the cars were gone, but the damage had been done. I still couldn't get into my unit because the locks had been changed. I'd need a locksmith, I'd need to install cameras, and above all, I'd need to find out exactly who in that Hoa decided to play pretend landlord with someone else's land. As I stood there staring at my hijacked unit, I wasn't just annoyed, I was livid. But more than that, I was determined. They thought I was just some quiet guy with a shed. They had no idea who they were dealing with. By the end of that week, every one of those cars would be gone. In the Hoa, they were going to regret ever stepping foot on my gravel. The morning after the sheriff had sent that woman packing from my property, I didn't even bother with coffee. I was wide awake, fueled by a mixture of righteous anger and sheer disbelief. After a restless night spent replaying her smug face and that ridiculous clipboard in my mind, I was ready to dig. The whole situation reeked of something much larger than a simple misunderstanding. People don't just randomly rekey storage units unless they're real confident or real crooked. And from what I'd seen, this Hoa didn't just cross the line, they practically bulldozed over it. First stop was the zoning office downtown, where my old buddy Carl still worked. Carl and I go way back. He helped me get my permits approved when I first built the storage unit, and we traded more than a few beers over poker games. When I explained what happened, he raised an eyebrow, clicked through some files, and then chuckled in that dry way of his that said, "This is going to be stupid. You're not going to believe this," he said, tilting the screen my way. On the county record's website, under temporary property use listings, there was a note filed from a homeowners association. It listed my property, my actual parcel number, as community overflow storage under soft use permit status. Soft use? That was nonsense. That classification didn't even exist for privately owned, managed units. Did I file that? I asked, knowing full well I hadn't. "No," Carl said. "And look here, the name attached to the submission is Maureen Ferris." There it was, the Hoa president, the smiling snake behind the curtain. I remembered her name from the shrieking woman yesterday. Maureen had apparently submitted a request for a community overflow agreement and backdated it with a fake owner consent form. There was even an uploaded signature that looked vaguely like mine if you squinted and tilted your head sideways. I could already tell it was forged. I got a certified copy printed, thank Carl, and headed straight for the locksmith who did the rekeying work in the area. Sure enough, the guy remembered the job. He was hesitant at first, until I told him the whole story and showed him the sheriff's report from yesterday. "Oh, man," he said, scratching his beard. "She came in with paperwork, said she was the property manager, had a lease and everything." I asked if I could see it. He showed me the scanned copy of what she gave him. There it was again, my signature, butchered and shaky, nowhere close to my real handwriting. She'd even copied a fake letterhead at the top, Daniels Storage Solutions, which wasn't a name I'd ever used for anything. It was like a kindergartner's version of forgery. But she had just enough confidence to make it believable. I asked if I could get a statement for legal purposes, and to his credit, the locksmith obliged. He looked more embarrassed than anything, and I didn't blame him. Maureen had conned him like she tried to con everyone else. Now I had evidence, legal records, a forged document, a third-party witness. I was building a case, and it wasn't looking good for her. By the time I got back to my unit, the lot was mostly clear again, but a few cars had returned. It was like roaches. The morning of the tow-off felt almost ceremonial. I arrived early, just as the first golden streaks of sunlight cut across the gravel lot, glinting off the hoods of the unauthorized vehicles that had crept back like clockwork. SUVs lined up like they belonged, tailgates down, lawn chairs half open. A couple of vehicles already spewing the faint sound of radio static from inside. One person, wearing slippers and a hoodie, was brushing their teeth with bottled water outside the back of a Subaru. The casual audacity of it all was almost impressive. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that their little community camping spot was about to be vaporized. Hank and his crew showed up into tow trucks at exactly 8 a.m., right on schedule. I had printed out a full list of license plates with dates, times, and photos as documentation, and I handed it off with a satisfied nod. He didn't need much explanation. One look around, one glance at the sign mounted clear and legal at the property's entrance, and he knew this was going to be a clean job. No warning, no discussion, just steel hooks, chains, and the sound of tow trucks lifting cars like slabs of meat off a grill. The first car they went for was the minivan that had blocked my unit days earlier. It still had the same faded HOA Gathers Together sticker in the back window, and a box of deflated beach floaties inside. The engine alarm chirped uselessly as the tires lifted. Then came a white BMW, poorly parked diagonally in half on the curb. Within minutes, 5 cars were already out of the lot and headed down the road. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. And then the screaming started. The first shriek came from a woman who ran out of a silver sedan, coffee mug in one hand, phone in the other. "Hey, that's my car," she yelled, stumbling toward the truck. Hank, calm as ever, held up the contract-eyed sign and pointed toward the sign on the fence. "This is private property. Unauthorized vehicles are being removed," he said, like he'd said it 100 times before. She gawked at him, then looked at me like I was the one who had gone rogue. "Maureen said it was okay. She told us the owner gave permission." I didn't even flinch. "Then maybe take it up with Maureen, because I am the owner." By the time the 8th vehicle was in the process of being winched, a small crowd had gathered. Most were watching in disbelief. Some were recording with their phones. One guy tried to bluff his way into stopping the process, threatening legal action, screaming about due process and impound fees, and you can't just do this. But all the paperwork was airtight. I had notified the sheriff's office, had the tow company ready with pre-filed vehicle violations, and had everything documented. There was no loophole to slither through. This wasn't an argument anymore. This was execution. Just as Hank's second truck began attaching to a dusty green SUV, a red prize came screeching into the lot and slammed to a stop. Out stepped the queen of Hoa theatrics herself, Gladys Nelson. Short hair teased into a militant puff, sunglasses bigger than her forehead, and a neon pink windbreaker flapping in the breeze like she was leading an aerobics rebellion. She stomped across the gravel screaming before her feet even hit solid ground. "What the hell is going on here?" she bellowed. "You're destroying community property. I'm calling Maureen right now. You'll be sued for every penny you own." I raised my hand before she could escalate into a full performance. "Gladys," I said calmly, "read the sign. You've all been trespassing. Every car here is going to the yard. The Hoa doesn't own this property, never did. They forged my signature, changed the locks, and now they're busted." She narrowed her eyes at me. "You can't do this. You're nobody. We're the community. We decide what's fair. You decided wrong," I said, "and now you're paying for it." Gladys did what Gladyses do best. She made it all worse. She stepped in front of the tow truck, arms outstretched, physically blocking it from leaving the lot. Hank gave me a look that asked silently whether I wanted him to wait. I nodded. Then I pulled out my phone and called Deputy Harrison again. The sheriff's deputy showed up 20 minutes later. While we waited, Gladys ranted and raved, filming herself, flinging accusations, calling me a land thief, a bully, even tried to say I had ambushed innocent families. The whole thing would have been comical if it weren't so clearly delusional. The people around her had started to scatter. A few even apologized as they left, realizing they'd been misled. Others didn't say anything, just slid into their cars and peeled away, embarrassed. When Harrison finally arrived, he stepped out of his cruiser with the tired look of someone who already knew what he was walking into. I waved him over and explained that the job was halfway done, that Gladys had been obstructing the tow company. He turned to her with that calm cop voice, the one that carries a hint of "Don't push it, Mum. You need to step away. You're interfering with lawful property removal. You're also trespassing. This is public access." She snapped, "No, ma'am, it's not. It's privately owned land, and you've all been told to vacate." She didn't argue much after that. Harrison escorted her to her prize and watched until she drove off, still yelling into her phone. Once she was gone, the job finished in peace. All told, we removed 17 cars from the lot that morning. 17. It was both ridiculous and satisfying, like pulling weeds from a garden that shouldn't have grown in the first place. By afternoon, the lot looked the way it was supposed to: clean, open, and mine. I stood there for a moment, taking it in, the quiet buzz of a breeze replacing the earlier chaos. The unit was finally accessible. The people who thought they could take without asking had been shown the door. Later that day, I uploaded a short video to my Facebook. Just a calm narration of the event with a time-lapse of the tow trucks at work. I didn't mention names, didn't shame anyone. Just facts, dates, the paperwork trail, and footage of the Hoa newsletter next to my deed. The video got shared hundreds of times before nightfall. Local groups picked it up. The comments were wild, some furious at Maureen, others cheering me on like I was David with a very legal slingshot. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, not because it was over, but because I had finally taken control. I knew there would be backlash. Gladys wouldn't vanish without throwing more drama into the air, and Maureen, she'd be scrambling to cover her tracks. But for now, I had done exactly what needed to be done. I had my land back, and I was just getting started. The day after the tow-off felt eerily quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the type that comes right before a storm rolls in. I sat on my porch with a mug of coffee, watching the sun come up over the gravel road, already expecting the next move. The Hoa hadn't just been embarrassed, they'd been publicly exposed. And people like Maureen didn't go down quietly. Sure enough, by mid-morning, a certified letter arrived at my mailbox. It wasn't even subtle. Legal stationery, official letterhead, and an envelope so thick it looked like it was trying too hard. Inside was a formal complaint. Maureen, on behalf of the Homeowners Association, was suing me for damages, claiming that my aggressive actions had endangered community members, disrupted traffic flow, and resulted in emotional harm to HOA residents. I read through the nonsense with growing amusement. Emotional harm? Disrupted traffic? They were using my lot like a yard sale parking lot, and now I was the villain? Maureen even accused me of unauthorized surveillance, claiming I violated privacy by posting videos of the incident. That was the moment I knew she was desperate. She'd been caught in a web of her own making, and now she was trying to spin a distraction. I didn't panic. I called my attorney, a no-nonsense guy named Patrick, who'd helped me with some easement issues years ago. Patrick read the complaint, snorted, and said, "This is what she's going with? Sounds like someone's bluffing." We began drafting a countersuit, and this one had real teeth: forgery, illegal access to private property, changing locks without permission, and public misrepresentation of land usage. We also added a clause about defamation, citing the Facebook posts where Hoa members were accusing me of being a hostile squatter on my own land, all things Maureen had fed them directly. Meanwhile, the fallout on their end was only getting worse. The Facebook video had taken off. Several local news outlets picked it up and reached out for interviews. I declined to appear on camera, but gave one reporter permission to quote the post and use the footage. That's when everything started unraveling for Maureen. Turns out she hadn't just lied about my property. A deeper look by some of her own Hoa members uncovered that she had sold off part of the HOA's actual community easement to a private developer months earlier. She'd done it quietly, claiming she had the board's backing. But when asked to produce the signed vote from the board, she couldn't, because there wasn't one. Apparently, That land deal had gone through right around the same time she started redirecting vehicles to my storage unit. It made perfect sense. She had sold off community parking space and needed a quick fix before anyone asked questions. My property became her band-aid. The newsletter entry, the fake lease, even the laminated signage, it was all part of the cover-up. And now it was collapsing. I didn't have to do much to fan the flames. HOA members began demanding an emergency meeting. A few of them even showed up at my gate, apologizing and asking if I'd consider leasing them the space legitimately. I told them I'd think about it, but only after things were settled legally. Still, I could feel the power shifting. Maureen had ruled over that neighborhood like a miniature tyrant, and now her supporters were fleeing like rats off a sinking ship. Patrick called me a couple of days later with a tone in his voice that I recognized as barely restrained satisfaction. The judge had dismissed Maureen's complaint in its entirety, and even hinted that sanctions could be coming for wasting court time. But that wasn't the best part. The forgery of my signature on the fake lease agreement. That was now officially referred to the DA's Office for Criminal Investigation. She wasn't just going to lose face. She might actually face charges. At that point, I had two choices: walk away satisfied or push a little further. I chose the second. I gathered all my documentation, printed copies of the fake newsletter and the lease, the locksmith's statement, camera footage, sheriff's incident reports, everything, and I gave it to a group of 3 HOA members who had organized their own effort to audit the board's actions. One of them was a retired real estate agent. Another was a former city planner. These people didn't mess around. Within 72 hours, they had compiled a full report of misappropriated funds, missing receipts, and unauthorized sales that went way beyond just my situation. The next HOA meeting was pure theater. I didn't attend, but someone sent me a video. Maureen stood there in front of a folding table, trying to explain why $19,000 worth of maintenance contracts were all paid to companies that didn't exist. When one homeowner demanded to know why a property not under Hoa jurisdiction was listed in their records as shared access, she sputtered, claimed confusion, then blamed volunteer miscommunication. No one bought it. The crowd turned on her like a school of piranhas. By the end of the meeting, a vote of no confidence was passed, and she was removed from her position. With Maureen out and the lawsuit squashed, I finally had breathing room. The land was mine again, legally, clearly, and without dispute. But I didn't stop there. I spent the next week cleaning up the area, repainting the fence, adding another camera, and installing a new coated gate. Then I got an idea. Instead of just guarding the lot like a dragon on a treasure hoard, I decided to make it work for me. I created a simple lease agreement, filed it with the county, and offered individual spaces for long-term parking, not to the Hoa, but to individuals, local business owners, people who needed RV or boat storage, even a guy who ran a landscaping service and needed a place to store his trailer. Within 10 days, the lot was 80% full, this time with tenants who paid and respected the rules. That felt like real justice. I had turned a hijacked situation into a profitable one, and more importantly, I had exposed someone who'd gotten away with this kind of behavior for years. All because I refused to back down, and because I knew the difference between standing on your land and being walked over on it. Gladys hadn't made any appearances since the towing day, but I had no doubt she was somewhere, probably licking her wounds and cooking up her next attempt at manufactured outrage. I kept the cameras rolling just in case. The storage unit looked better than ever. Clean lot, organized spaces, not a single unauthorized car in sight. And the best part, a brand new metal sign at the entrance, bolted down tight. Read, private property. No Hoa access. Trespassers will be towed again. And I meant every word. A week after the HOA fiasco officially died down, I was standing beside my storage unit with a cold soda in hand, watching the dust settle, both literally and figuratively. The gravel lot was quiet, just the hum of crickets and the occasional breeze kicking up the scent of fresh paint. From the newly sprayed gate, the chaos that had once overrun my land was now nothing more than a story I could tell with a smirk. But just as I started to think things had finally returned to normal, the familiar sound of tires crunching gravel made me turn around. And there she was, Gladys Nelson, the storm in a pink windbreaker, back on my property as if nothing had happened. She stepped out of her car like a movie villain in the third act. Sunglasses on, lips pursed, arms crossed. I stood still, watching her approach like someone staring down a confused goose in their driveway. You don't move, you don't provoke, you just prepare for noise. She didn't disappoint. You think you've won. She started, her voice already trembling with restrained fury. But this isn't over. We're filing for reinstatement, and when the new board is elected, you'll have to answer for all of this. I didn't respond at first. I just sipped my soda, nodded slowly, and waited for her to run out of steam. She clearly expected a fight, or at least some dramatic retort, but all I said was, "You're trespassing." Again, that hit her harder than anything I could have yelled. She sputtered something about community rights, about shared interests and open discussions. I pointed to the sign that now hung over the gate in bold red lettering, the one that had become a bit of a local legend. She read it, scoffed, and then, in a moment of pure Gladys careless defiance, walked straight up to the gate and threw her soda at it. It splattered pathetically against the metal, a weak statement followed by an even weaker glare. I pulled out my phone and showed her the live camera feed. She was on it, crystal clear, frozen mid-tantrum, her jaw clenched. Without another word, she turned around and stomped back to her car. It sputtered a bit before starting up, which was probably the only comedic timing the universe could have offered in that moment. She peeled out of the lot like a teenager denied prom. After she was gone, I sent the footage to Deputy Harrison, not because I wanted her arrested, but because I wanted it on record. Harrison replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji, and I got it. Thanks. That was enough. Gladys was no longer a threat. She was noise, static, a leftover echo from a battle already won. Later that week, I hosted a barbecue. It wasn't just to celebrate reclaiming my land. It was to thank the people who had stood by me, helped with documents, shared the video, and even testified when Maureen tried to gaslight the court. We set up folding tables under string lights, had coolers full of iced tea and soda, and grilled enough food to feed a football team. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. A group of small-town folks enjoying the kind of peace you can only appreciate after fighting tooth and nail for it. Neighbors came, business owners came, even a couple of former Hoa members showed up. Awkward at first, but quickly welcomed once they made clear. They weren't there to stir up more trouble. One guy, a retired contractor named Ethan, gave a little toast halfway through the evening. He raised his burger and said, to Daniel, who reminded us that private land is private for a reason, and to Hoa drama finally staying out of our side of town, everyone laughed, clinked cups, and went back to enjoying their plates. It felt good, better than good. It felt like the ground beneath me had been restored, not just in a physical sense, but in a moral one. They tried to trample over me with rules that didn't apply, lies no one verified, and a confidence built on decades of no one pushing back. But I had pushed back, and I didn't just stop them, I made them regret it. In the weeks that followed, the new coded gate and camera system ran smoothly. The tenants I'd leased spots to respected the rules, paid on time, and even helped keep the place clean. No more trash bins chained to my fences, no more strange cars blocking my rob door. Just clean gravel, sharp boundaries, and full control. Then something unexpected happened. A representative from the city's planning office reached out. They'd seen the story in the local press and were interested in discussing ways to collaborate on a new community project involving privately managed shared use spaces for contractors and small businesses. My unit apparently had become something of a model for how to push back on bureaucratic overreach. With style, I wasn't looking to become the poster boy for anti-Hoa sentiment, but I agreed to the meeting. We talked about legal protections for landowners, clearer signage ordinances, and how towns like ours needed more transparency in Hoa activities. Nothing official came out of it right away, but I liked the idea that my little showdown in a gravel lot might help someone else avoid the mess I'd been dragged through. One afternoon, I was walking the property line, inspecting the fencing, and making a list of supplies I'd need for some drainage upgrades. The sun was warm, the sky cloudless, and the hum of cicadas filled the air. As I rounded the far corner, I paused for a second and looked back at the whole lot. The red storage unit stood tall. The gravel sparkled in the sunlight. My sign stood proudly by the gate, and I thought to myself, not about the Hoa, not about Maureen or Gladys or their phony rules, but about how close I'd come to just letting it slide. If I hadn't shown up that day and challenged that woman blocking my door, they might have gotten away with it. If I hadn't documented everything, called the sheriff, hired the tow trucks, filed the countersuit, none of it would have changed. They would have claimed more land, taken more liberties, and moved on to the next victim. But they didn't, because I was the line they couldn't cross. I stood there for a long time, just breathing in the silence, real silence. Not the silence of submission, but the kind you earn after reclaiming what's rightfully yours. Then I turned back toward the unit, pocketed my list, and got back to work. There were still things to fix, projects to complete, and people depending on those lease spots. But one thing was certain. Nobody was ever going to mistake my land for community property again. And if they did, well, I still had Hank on speed dial.